9.4, I asked you about the United Nations. Now, I know all of you have heard about the United Nations. We've mentioned it in class in relation to Israel, the creation of the partition plan. But other than that, it seems like many people didn't know a lot about the United Nations. So, perfect example for me to teach you about it. Some things that people said, something about peace, something about countries, but a lot of world peace was a guess. So, we can't quite answer the second question, is it a valuable institution or should it be disbanded? So, we'll come to that at the end of this lesson. The United Nations was first, the phrase was first used in its present sense by FDR, by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, during World War II. And he used it in reference to the Allied nations, talking about these United Nations and the fight that we're in together. And that term was borrowed even when the war is over. And the organization, as we know it, was created pretty soon after the war, October 1945. It is created, it's 50 countries, and if you want a quick overview, there is a video here in Canvas that you can watch. But the goal of the United Nations first is to replace the League of Nations. We know that the League of Nations failed with this idea of collective security. We talked about this in the last unit, that it was doomed to fail for a number of reasons. The United Nations is not about collective security, but really, in general, it's about world peace. How do we maintain peace rather than worrying about how we're going to fight or who we're going to fight? And this is the logo. This is the flag of the United Nations. Light blue is usually seen as a very peaceful color. You can see the world. We have sort of bird's eye view of the world, the longitude and latitude lines. And then surrounded by the olive branches, the universal symbol for peace. Now, there are three main bodies, or three main parts of the United Nations. The first part is the Security Council. The job of the Security Council is to deal with issues of international security, potential causes or potential places where there might be a fight or there might be an outbreak of a war. So this is sort of the elite group. There are 15 members on the Security Council, and the UN's location, or the UN's headquarters, I should say, are in New York City. Now, it was built in New York City rather than London or Paris or Berlin, because remember, right after World War II, those countries needed to rebuild. America was never attacked directly other than Pearl Harbor. So it made sense to build this organization in New York City. There are 15 members on the Security Council, 5 permanent members and 10 rotating members. So what that means is there are 5 countries who always have a spot at this table. France, Great Britain, China, Russia, and the United States. Because at the end of World War II, those were the most prominent nations in the world. You don't have Germany because of that whole Nazi thing. We just finished fighting the Germans, so we're not going to give them sort of any special benefits, even though today Germany is incredibly powerful. The 10 members have 2-year terms. They rotate out. And so if they are voting on something, let's say hypothetically there is an issue in Ukraine and the Security Council would like to vote that no one be allowed to interfere with Ukraine. Well, because Russia, or at the time the Soviet Union, is one of the 5 permanent members, they have veto power. So any one of the 5 permanent members can veto the others. So that makes it very difficult to accomplish things, especially in issues that are very contentious or high tension. The second part of the United Nations is the General Assembly. This is like the Congress or the Parliament. This is the part that everybody can belong to. It's not the elite, it's everyone. And both the General Assembly and the Security Council can create resolutions or sort of international laws, hopefully. There are 193 members in the United Nations as a whole, and governments will appoint ambassadors to the United Nations, and they'll all come sit here, and you'll see them wearing different earpieces because of all the different languages that are spoken. And this is the stage where if a world leader really wants to make a statement or make a speech to the whole world, they will come here to the United Nations to do it. One of the most important things that they did at the beginning of the United Nations was the creation of the Declaration of Human Rights. And a lot of this is in response to some of the issues from the Second World War, that you can't restrict the movement of people, that genocide is not good, that torture should not be allowed. And so the idea is, with these countries that agree to join the United Nations, that they will adhere to these issues on human rights. However, let's say, for instance, North Korea. North Korea has these horrible prison camps, and North Korea is part of the United Nations. So if the General Assembly says, North Korea, you are violating human rights, what can the United Nations do about it? If the goal is world peace, the goal is to avoid fighting, the only thing the United Nations can really do is say, don't do that. They don't have a whole lot of power other than to say, no, that's bad, don't do that. The third main part of the United Nations is the Secretariat. Now, the Security Council and the General Assembly can come up with resolutions. It is the job of the Secretariat. Think of secretaries. They do a lot of work in an office. That's what the Secretariat of the United Nations does. And the leader of the Secretariat, and therefore sort of the general part of all the United Nations, is called the Secretary General. These are the people who do the actual work. So let's say the General Assembly would like to pass a resolution that they want to assist famine in Ethiopia. The Secretariat would then, they'll have economists who crunch the numbers and figure out where are we going to get the food, how are we going to get it to Ethiopia, who's going to distribute it to the Ethiopians. This is sort of the people on the ground. All of the work is done through the Secretariat. Through the Secretariat, there has been the creation of a number of programs and agencies that are part of or are related to the United Nations. We've got the International Criminal Court, the ICC. If this is about world peace and justice, then you need a court system. This is located in The Hague, Netherlands. And there have been cases of world leaders who were harming their own people, and they were put on trial. And the judges are appointed by the General Assembly. So it's trying to create a world that has a justice system. How much does it have to do with war and world peace? Not much. Got the WHO, the World Health Organization. This is the part that will help supply mosquito nets to prevent malaria or polio vaccines. Really, really good, important work. Not really related to world peace. There's UNESCO, the United Nations Economic, Social, and Cultural Organization. If you've ever traveled, there are lots of places that are called UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And that means they have been deemed as culturally important and worth protecting. So for instance, the Great Pyramids in Egypt, or Machu Picchu, or sometimes it's much more intangible, like French cuisine, these things that are seen as important to culture. As a historian and someone who loves to travel, I think that's very important to protect those things. But how much does it have to do with world peace? Not much. Then we have UNICEF, and hopefully all of you know about UNICEF. You see it at Halloween with Trick or Treat for UNICEF, and the money is raised for children's relief, giving children clean water, adequate food, housing, schooling. And again, really important, good work. But what does it have to do with preventing war? And then we have another example, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. It's sort of the world's bank in a way. If a country is in debt and they need a loan, the IMF can help give them a loan so that they continue to function properly. All of these programs are great programs, but they don't really have a lot to do with world peace. The general idea is if we can help the world function more smoothly, maybe we'll be able to avoid war. But if you're already moving towards war, there's not much the United Nations can do. So then there's the question, is it valuable? Is it worth maintaining, or does it need to change? Now we're going to check in with Germany after World War II. Remember at the end of World War II, there were these series of conferences. We talked about Yalta and Potsdam. The Yalta Conference is in February 1945 with FDR, Winston Churchill, and Stalin. And the biggest thing they decided there was what to do with Germany. They had learned their lesson from 1919 in the Treaty of Versailles, that taking away German territory, forcing them to make reparation payments, punishing Germany, didn't work. And in fact, it actually backfired completely on them. So that's when they decided at Yalta to sort of divvy up Germany. Germany will still exist. It will still be a single country. However, the winning Allied nations will occupy or sort of babysit Germany as it begins to rebuild from the war. Then with the Potsdam Conference, this is in summer of 1945, the biggest thing decided there has to do with Berlin. The capital city of Germany, Berlin, it's culturally important, significant, and it is in the heart of that Soviet-controlled territory. So what they decide is that the city of Berlin will also be separated into the 4 parts. From the Soviet perspective, from Stalin's perspective, he's not a huge fan of this. Remember, he wanted that buffer zone. He wanted separation from the West and capitalism and democracy and all of this. With Berlin, that influence is right in the heart of his territory. So he wants to do something about it. That will lead us to the Berlin Airlift. In 1948, so we're just about 3 years after the end of the war, Stalin is fed up and he wants total control of Berlin. So he cuts off supplies from the West. As you can see on this map here, remember we've got the 4 parts of Germany and the 4 parts of Berlin. Stalin closes the roads and does not allow the trains to travel from the Western territories to Berlin. What he's hoping, because all of the citizens in the eastern part of Berlin look to the communists, look to the Soviets for help. Those in the West look to the Americans and British and French. If their trade routes are cut off, then the Americans and British and French cannot resupply West Berlin. They have 35 days worth of food. And what Stalin is hoping is that the West Berliners will look to him for help, and he can come in and he can be the hero and say, well, of course I'll help you. But the result would be that all of Berlin would be under Soviet control. Now, this was an extremely tense moment. What are the Allies going to do about this? So they could blow up the blockades. They could force Stalin to open up the roads again, but that brings us right back into war. And remember, war now means nuclear weapons. So rather than fighting, the Allies decide that if they can't use the roads, they can't use the rails, they will use the skies. And there are, you can see in that map, there are 3 different airports in Western-controlled Berlin. So this is the airlift. For 14 months, the Allies ship in everything, absolutely everything, and that averages out to be about 1 plane landing every 4 minutes. So this is the Berlin Airlift. In order to help maintain life in West Berlin and to make sure that the West Berliners don't look to the communists for help. So they're shipping in all of the food, all of the milk, all of the beef, all of the coal to heat the homes. This was a huge undertaking and very, very expensive. But really the West looks at it as, what is the alternative? We spend this money and this time to help these people, or else they will get help from Stalin and Soviet Russia. So it's seen as a very worthwhile endeavor. And there is a video, if you want to watch, about the Candy Bomber, who was one of the pilots during the Berlin Airlift. One of the things I love from the video is little Helga, who says, you know, we were the enemy. Just a few years ago, the Americans had been fighting the Germans. And in demonstrating their charity, that they are willing to help out these other people, it really shows what is great about the American system. But the other thing that the Berlin Airlift shows is these 2 sides. They are not going to come to an agreement. And although the goal was to keep Germany a single nation, because the Soviets control one part of it, they just have completely different opinions. So now we have the creation of 2 separate countries, East and West Germany. Now they do have official names. We have the German Democratic Republic, and we just call it East Germany. And then the Federal Republic of Germany, that's West Germany. I have this theory about oppressive governments that they always use official titles that seem all about the people and democracy and choice. So you've got the Democratic Republic, sounds all about the people, when really it's not. It's communism. Even though there are 2 separate countries now, Berlin stays divided. meaning the West still is given access to Berlin. So they're given the trade routes back. They can use the roads, they can use the rails once again to resupply. But now there is a border between these two countries. This really is sort of the first real conflict, we'd call it, of the Cold War, because it shows the aggression between these two sides, but not actually fighting. So this is part of why it's a Cold War, is there is tension, but it doesn't ever heat up into full war again.